Hey everybody, welcome back. Today, as promised, we're going to do the American Pale Ale. This is a brew that I've talked about a couple times. I've only done one batch of it in the past, and it turned out great. So let's go through the grain bill list here and what you'll need if you choose to brew this beer. You're going to need 9 pounds, 8 ounces of 2-row, 8 ounces of Carmel Crystal 60. Then, as far as hops go, you're going to need 1 ounce of Centennial and a ½ ounce of Cascade. As far as the yeast goes, it's just the Safale American US-05 yeast, so it's the very common ale yeast. And it's pretty easy. It's a 60-minute boil. We'll step through it. Right now I have the water heating. I'll be ready to mash in here probably in about a half an hour. It's a little cool in the shop today, but not terrible. And when I brewed the other day, when I did the 2-batch Sunday, it got extremely warm in here by the time I got probably halfway through the first batch. So I thought today would be a better day because the high outside is going to be in the mid-50s. So it'll be a lot more comfortable in here. So that's it. Back during the mash-in. All right. Time to mash in. The formula calls for 3 3/8 gallons of water to be used in the mash tun at 168 tight quarters. So hope I don't block you, but I probably will. So again, as I stir this in, I am not shoving it down into the screen. That'll cause a lot of problems if you do that. If you've ever had a stuck sparge before, it's a pain to clear it to try and get your wort to run into your brew kettle again. So I am always very conscious of trying to be as careful as I can in this step. I've had a few stuck sparges and they were absolutely no fun. So kind of slow and steady is really the key here. And this will sit for an hour once I get the cap on it. It should be at about 152 degrees, and it'll sit there for an hour before we come back and fly sparge. And we'll talk a little more about that as we get to that step. I know this is rather tedious and boring. So we'll be back after this sits for an hour. Okay, it's been an hour. So I'm going to take the top off the mash tun so that I can start sparging in a second. But first we're going to want to do our first runnings here and make sure we don't have a stuck sparge, and that we make sure that the brew starts to run with very little to no grain in it after a couple minutes here. Usually I run about a quart into this little kettle. You can see right in here, and that must have been a little bit of a plug. You can see it running against the side there, and what I look for is grain sliding down the metal there, and I can see grain right now, and you probably can too. So it takes a while to actually get things working under that screen as far as the grain bed being clean without any other grain in it. The Kolsch batches from the other day definitely had a much cleaner run on the second batch than the first. This is actually looking pretty good right now. I'm going to let it run a little bit longer though to make sure. And then what I will do is I'll take the little kettle out and I'll hold this over my grain bed, the spoon, and I will pour the wort back into the spoon and let it disperse over the grain. And then because you don't want it to drill down into your screen area and start pushing grain out through your tubing into your brew pot. So we'll let that fill up a little bit more, and then I'll get the sparge going after I dump the fluid back into the mash tun. So, back in a minute. Okay, I am sparging now. Water is going into the mash tun over the grain bed, coming down and into the boil kettle. And we are going to sparge 4.55 gallons of water at 168 degrees. Now, I'll be looking and taking readings with the refractometer as we go to make sure that I never get below that 1.01 level reading, so that we don't draw tannins in. So this is kind of it for now. This takes roughly 40 minutes and up from there. Usually I'm somewhere between 40 and an hour. It just kind of depends. So it's kind of a slow, tedious process, but definitely a necessary one as far as measuring the gravity as you go. So we'll be back once the sparging process is over with. Here's a quick picture inside the refractometer. I know it's really hard to see, and it's really hard to take a shot of it with the video camera, but you get an idea where that line is right now. I believe it's at 1.095, and we want to make sure that as we sparge, we don't go down below 1.01. Okay, we finished sparging, and we are at our pre-boil volume that we needed to be at. And you can see what a difference between the Kolsch and the American Pale Ale just by adding 8 ounces of Crystal 60, how much darker that looks than the previous brew we did. And this smells great. This is really an outstanding beer. So once she starts to boil, we'll go ahead and throw in the hops. So back in a minute. All right, as you can see, it is starting to boil. So we are going to add our hops, which are the Centennial hops, 1 ounce. And the pre-boil volume on this is supposed to be 6.5. And remember, you've got to really watch it when you start getting to the point where it's boiling and you're throwing hops in, because all of this stuff can boil over. And boy, is that unpleasant. So I'm going to continue to dial it back a hair. The other thing you can do is have a spray bottle full of water, and you can knock it down that way. Our pre-boil gravity on this was supposed to be 1.044, and I was at 1.048, so pretty close. All right, well, it's going to take a little babysitting here for a while to make sure I don't end up with a mess on the floor. So about 40 minutes from now, we'll come back and we'll end up adding the chiller. So back in a bit. Okay, there's 20 minutes left in the boil, so we're going to get the chiller in there. Got to be a little careful when you put it in if you've run it lately, because it does find the smallest amount of water in that tubing and spit it out at you. All right, so that'll be in there for the rest of the boil. In 10 minutes, we'll throw in the ½ ounce of Cascade hops. And 10 minutes after that, we'll terminate the boil, we'll start the chiller, get this thing moving in the right direction. All right, there's 10 minutes left in the boil, so we'll drop in our last set of hops. That's a ½ ounce of Cascade, and they'll boil for 10 minutes. Then we'll terminate the boil, start the chiller. Okay, that's it. That's an hour. We're going to terminate the boil. I'm going to hook up both of the hoses for the chiller and then start the chiller. And I'll be back once it has chilled down. We are slowly getting there as all hell is about to break loose outside. There's a big thunderstorm headed this way. I actually have the hoses coming in through the storm door into the shop, and I've secured the door with a huge rubber strap so that it doesn't swing wildly open if this thing hits. But it looks pretty intense, and right now we've gone from 212 down to about 150 in, I'd say, maybe 10 minutes, well, maybe even less than that. And I know a lot of you realize I use the pool water, which is at 45 right now, runs through the chiller and discharges back into the pool. So it's plenty cold to get it down to where it needs to be. So back in a bit, hopefully. Okay, we've chilled the batch down. I'm at about 76 on here, but I know it's cooler than that because it's a little bit warmer as it comes up. So let's run it down into the fermenting pail. Not a big fan of the plastic pails, but when you get as far behind as I am on brewing beer, you run out of carboys pretty quick, and this is what you're left with. So anyway, we'll let that run in there, and when that's complete, we'll come back, aerate it, and we will pitch the yeast. All right, let's lay a little oxygen into the wort. Give the yeast something to work with. Again, this doesn't have to be some sort of violent infusion of oxygen. Just that's plenty right there. Okay, I've sanitized the scissors, and I've also sanitized my hands and the yeast packet. And this is, again, US-05 yeast. And we're just going to sprinkle it over the top of the wort. Try and do it as evenly as you can. Now, I realize once I pick this up to move it, it's going to be sloshing around in there. And given what's happening outside, it'll probably be a while before I move it anyway. Okay. One step left. Put the top on, put the airlock on. All right, that's it. It's ready. We're all capped up, and once the storm's over with, kind of hoping it was over a little while ago. It looks like we're going to get another round here. Then I'll move it in the house and put it in a spot where I'm not worried about whether I get a little too active in my fermentation. This is not my beer. This is Fuel Cafe by the Lakefront Brewery up in Milwaukee, which is an outstanding microbrewery. Cheers. This is like a coffee beer. I'm kind of disappointed in the head. I'm not sure why it's that way. But it's got plenty of carbonation and a delightful flavor. So if you're ever in the area up there, you get a chance to buy some of this. I mean, they make a lot of beer. It's really good. I always enjoyed their pumpkin beer, which is a seasonal beer for them. And so now I'm going to brew a batch of pumpkin beer coming up sometime later on. So that's it for the Pale Ale, the American Pale Ale. I'll be back when it's done so we can talk about how it tastes. Should be a great beer. Until then, I hope you guys have a great day. Cheers. This has been a Matty Boy presentation. Say bye-bye, Matty. Bye-bye.